They called us fragile. They called us soft. They looked at our pale skin, our bones that break, our hearts that bleed, and they laughed. In a galaxy full of towering predators, armored leviathans, and machines of living steel, humanity should have been prey. We should have died quietly, forgotten on the fringes of the stars. And yet, we are still here, still fighting, still surviving. But there is a truth the galaxy refuses to face, a truth even we hesitate to admit aloud. Humanity is not fragile. Humanity is not weak. Humanity survives because, at our core, we are monsters. And monsters do whatever it takes to endure. This is not a tale of noble warriors or enlightened philosophers. This is not the story of chosen ones rising by destiny's hand. This is the story of how humanity clawed its way into galactic history by embracing the very darkness that others feared. Where others recoiled from the unthinkable, we stepped forward. Where others faltered at cruelty, we adapted. Where others saw horror, we saw opportunity. The first time the Dominion met us, they dismissed us as nothing more than inconvenient pests. Their soldiers were twice our height, their armor impenetrable, their weapons centuries beyond our science. When their warships descended on the colonies of Vega Prime, they expected another swift conquest. They expected broken cries and trembling submission. What they found instead was fire. The colonists of Vega Prime had no fleet, no advanced weapons, no chance of victory. But they had hunger and they had rage. They set their skies ablaze with crude missiles, strapped explosives to mining drones, turned entire cities into traps. They fought not for honor, not for glory, but because surrender was worse than death. The Dominion laughed as human bodies piled in the streets. But then the laughter stopped, because the humans did not break. Even as they burned, even as their lungs filled with ash, they kept fighting. Dominion soldiers would wake in the night to find their comrades gutted in the dark, their rations poisoned, their machines sabotaged. The humans learned every weakness, every crack in the armor, every fear that could be exploited. They fought like cornered animals, savage and unrelenting. And for the first time in centuries, the Dominion felt something they had not felt in generations. Fear. Fear of prey that did not act like prey. Fear of prey that fought like predators. There is a story the Dominion whispers even now, one they do not dare speak loudly. They tell of a single human boy, no older than 16, who strapped himself with stolen plasma charges and ran into the belly of a Dominion war walker. His body was torn apart, but his explosion ripped the machine open from the inside, toppling it in a rain of fire. That image spread across human space like a spark, igniting something that the Dominion could never contain. The galaxy calls it brutality. We call it survival, and survival has always demanded monstrosity. Think of our history even before the stars. We hunted creatures larger and stronger than us with sharpened sticks and burning torches. We painted caves with the blood of beasts we brought down, not with strength, but with cunning. We spread across a world filled with predators, and every single time we became the apex. Not by being the fastest, not by being the strongest, but by being the most relentless. So when the stars opened to us, what did they expect? Did they think the nature of humanity would change simply because we stepped onto alien soil? No, we carried that fire into the void. The fire that says, if you hurt us, we will hurt you worse. If you try to bury us, we will rise from the grave and drag you down with us. This is the heart of the monster. The willingness to pay any price, endure any pain, commit any act, so long as survival is assured. And that, more than any weapon, more than any alliance, is why we remain. But let me tell you something darker. The Dominion thought they were fighting farmers and miners. And they were. But within months, those farmers learned to make weapons out of scrap. Those miners learned to collapse tunnels onto armored squads. Entire populations adapted faster than empires thought possible. And when humanity saw that the Dominion feared the shadows, we became shadows. When they feared fire, we became infernos. Do you see it? The monster is not born, it is made, forged in desperation. And humanity has been desperate since the day we learned to stand upright. That is why the galaxy does not understand us. They look at us and see weakness, and weakness terrifies them because it hides something worse. Weakness that survives is not weakness at all. It is evolution. It is endurance. It is the monster waiting in the dark. The first war with the Dominion was not a war of fleets and armies. It was a war of wills, and the will of humanity was unbreakable because we accepted what others would not. That survival is ugly. That survival demands sacrifice. That survival requires us to become something the galaxy does not want to see in the mirror. And so, while they laughed, we endured. While they mocked, we learned. While they looked down on us as vermin, we sharpened our claws. By the time they realized what we truly were, it was too late. This is the story of monsters. Our story, humanity's story. And it begins in the ashes of Vega Prime, where prey became predator, and predators discovered what it means to fight something that does not stop. Because humans are monsters. And that is why we survive. The Dominion could not comprehend it at first. They had conquered 100 species before us. Entire civilizations had fallen with barely a whimper. The Drakari surrendered after their fleets were shattered. The Sarath bent the knee when their cities burned. The Yorin, proud and cunning, swore loyalty after their leaders were assassinated. To the Dominion, every war was the same pattern. Crush resistance, install governors, strip resources, and move on. But with humanity, the pattern broke. When the Dominion burned Vega Prime to ash, they expected the surrounding colonies to collapse in terror. Instead, the survivors poured into neighboring worlds like wildfire, carrying with them stories of vengeance. They did not speak of surrender. They spoke of blood. They spoke of fire. They spoke of fighting until their last breath, and then fighting still, with teeth, with nails, with nothing at all if nothing was left. Soon the Dominion realized they had not just attacked a world. They had awakened a swarm. Every attempt to pacify human colonies was met with resistance that defied all logic. Dominion soldiers would march into a settlement expecting frightened civilians and instead find every alley lined with traps, mines hidden under floorboards, explosives made from stolen fuel cells, knives dipped in poisons harvested from alien plants. Even children were weapons, throwing burning oil, screaming war songs as they charged into the teeth of armored squads. To the Dominion, it was madness. To us, it was survival. And survival to humans is not an abstract idea. It is carved into our bones. We remember the ice ages, when fire was the difference between life and death. We remember the plagues that swept across continents and we learned to endure. We remember wars that consumed entire generations, yet left us standing, scarred but alive. For every horror in our history, there is a story of survival. And that survival has always been ugly, always been monstrous. The Dominion thought themselves monsters. But they had rules. They had limits. They believed there were lines you did not cross, acts too barbaric even for conquerors. Humanity never believed in such lines. If the enemy starved us, we ate rats. If the enemy burned our cities, we fought in the ashes. If the enemy slaughtered our families, we carried their bones into battle as weapons. What the Dominion called atrocities, we called necessities. What they called madness, we called resolve. And it spread like a sickness. The galaxy watched, horrified, as the humans refused to die. The Dominion broadcast their victories, thinking fear would break us. But instead, those images only fueled our fire. Entire planets whispered of humans not as victims but as nightmares. Soldiers told stories of colonists who fought even while burning alive. Of mothers who strangled Dominion officers with their bare hands. Of soldiers who laughed as they bled out, still clawing for another kill. That is when the Dominion changed their tone. They no longer called us vermin. They called us monsters. They were not wrong. But here is the secret they did not understand. Being a monster is not shameful. It is not weakness. It is strength. It is the willingness to do what others will not. It is the refusal to kneel. It is the fire that burns long after hope is gone. And when one monster survives, others follow. From the ashes of Vega Prime rose leaders who understood this truth. Men and women who had nothing left to lose, who spoke to their people with voices full of rage and promise. They did not say, "We will rebuild." They did not say, "We will forgive." They said, "We will never stop." And so humanity changed. We stopped pretending to be like the other species of the galaxy. We stopped clinging to notions of honor or restraint. We embraced the monster within. The first human fleets were not fleets at all, just scrap ships welded together in hidden shipyards, armed with weapons stolen from dead Dominion soldiers. But those fleets fought with a savagery the galaxy had never seen. They rammed Dominion cruisers head-on, tearing themselves apart just to cripple a ship 5 times their size. They turned asteroids into battering rams, hurling them into orbital stations with stolen engines strapped to their backs. Every battle was a gamble, every maneuver reckless, every tactic dripping with desperation. And somehow it worked, because the Dominion was not fighting an enemy that cared about survival of ships. They were fighting an enemy that only cared about survival of the species. We could lose fleets, we could lose worlds, we could lose everything and still come back snarling, bleeding, and ready to tear out throats with our teeth. That is what unsettled them most. Not our weapons, not our numbers, but our relentlessness. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion found themselves bleeding in ways they could not stop. And as they faltered, the galaxy watched with wide eyes, because suddenly the prey had teeth sharper than the predators. Suddenly the species mocked, as frail had become a storm of claws and fire. Suddenly humanity was no longer a footnote in galactic history. We were the nightmare that stalked the stars. But let us not pretend this story is one of glory. The truth is far darker. We survived not because we were noble, but because we embraced monstrosity. We lied, we betrayed, we slaughtered without hesitation. We destroyed our own worlds rather than let them fall intact. We burned fields, poisoned water, turned every inch of soil into a weapon. It was not pretty. It was not clean. It was survival. And survival has never been about beauty. So when the Dominion asked why we would not bow, when they demanded to know why humans refused to die, we gave them their answer. We told them the truth that burned in our hearts. We are monsters, and monsters do not kneel. The galaxy soon learned that fighting humanity was not like fighting any other species. The Dominion's war doctrine was built on intimidation and overwhelming force. They relied on crushing morale as much as destroying armies. Entire civilizations had collapsed at the mere sight of their dreadnoughts blotting out the stars. Fear was their greatest weapon, but fear is a strange thing when turned against those who already know it intimately. Humanity was born in fear. We feared the dark. We feared hunger. We feared beasts stronger than us, storms more powerful than us, plagues that wiped out whole families in days. Fear shaped us, sharpened us, taught us how to endure. By the time we reached the stars, fear was not our weakness. It was our companion. So when Dominion fleets descended, trying to smother us beneath their shadow, humans looked up at the void and did not bow. We had been living with shadows since the first fire was lit on Earth. And we learned long ago that the only way to fight fear is to become something more terrifying than what you fear. That is what broke the Dominion. Not just our tactics, not just our technology, but our willingness to embody fear itself. To become monsters so terrible that even predators learned to hesitate. The war dragged on. Years passed. Human colonies became fortresses of brutality. Cities dug themselves underground, labyrinths of traps and tunnels where entire populations could vanish at will. Dominion troops called them warrens, haunted places where you never knew if the ground itself would collapse beneath you. Every step was danger, every corner a knife in the dark. And above ground, the fields of war became graveyards. Human bodies lay where they fell, but never in vain. Because for every soldier the Dominion killed, 10 more rose from the ashes, fueled by vengeance. For every city they burned, 3 more declared rebellion. They could not stamp us out, because the very act of trying only made us stronger. That was when the Dominion turned to desperation. They tried terror on a scale the galaxy had not seen in centuries. They unleashed weapons that burned atmospheres, toxins that turned oceans to poison, viruses engineered to unravel DNA. To any other species, it would have been the end. To humanity, it was a challenge. We buried our dead and kept fighting. When the air burned, we built shelters deeper than their fire could reach. When oceans turned to poison, we learned to drink from steam and condensation. When their viruses spread, our scientists worked night and day in caves, cutting flesh, testing cures on themselves until one survived. And when one survived, humanity survived, because that is our way. One spark in the dark is enough to light a fire. The Dominion thought they could horrify us into submission, but what they never understood is that horror has always been our teacher. We know starvation, we know plague, we know slaughter. They did not show us anything new. They only reminded us of what we already were, and we adapted. There are stories whispered across human space of the siege of Corvallis, a planet of 12 million, cut off and surrounded for 6 years. The Dominion thought they would starve. Instead, they found an enemy that turned every scrap into a weapon, every resource into fuel. They ate roots, insects, even the flesh of their own dead. The Dominion called it barbarism. Humanity called it survival. And when the blockade finally broke, the humans of Corvallis emerged from the ruins lean, feral, and unstoppable. Not a single Dominion soldier survived their wrath. That story spread farther than any propaganda, and it changed how the galaxy saw us. To the neutral species watching from the sidelines, humanity was no longer fragile prey. We were the fire that refused to be extinguished. We were the monster you thought you had killed, only to hear its footsteps behind you in the dark. We were the species that endured what no one else dared. But even among ourselves, there was fear. Not fear of the Dominion, but fear of what we were becoming. Parents looked at their children and wondered if they were raising warriors or beasts. Soldiers stared into mirrors and no longer recognized the faces that glared back. Because in surviving, we were changing. We were embracing the monster too deeply to ever return. And maybe that was the price. The galaxy wanted us broken, but we would rather be monsters than extinct. So we accepted the blood on our hands, the madness in our eyes, the savagery that carried us forward. We told ourselves the same truth over and over again. Survival is never clean. By then, even the Dominion's leaders began to whisper among themselves. They had unleashed something they could not cage, a nightmare in human skin. An enemy who did not stop, who did not break, who did not understand the word surrender. That was when humanity did the unthinkable. We stopped fighting defensively. We stopped holding the line. We went on the attack. Our ragged fleets, patched together from wreckage and stolen tech, began striking deep into Dominion territory, not with strategy, but with savagery. We targeted supply chains, slaughtered garrisons, turned outposts into charnel houses. Where once the Dominion hunted us, now they felt the hunt turn against them. Entire Dominion worlds began to whisper about the human disease. They said we were not soldiers but plagues, spreading wherever we touched, infecting every system with rebellion. Governors begged for reinforcements, generals demanded retreats. For the first time, the Empire's laughter was gone, because humanity had shown them the truth. We were not weak, we were not prey. We were monsters, and monsters once awakened do not go back to sleep. The Dominion had always believed their empire eternal. For millennia, their fleets had swept across the stars, their armies had crushed rebellion, their banners had hung over conquered worlds. They believed themselves untouchable, unshakable. But then came humanity, and with humanity came the cracks. The cracks began not in the Dominion's ships, but in their minds. Their soldiers, creatures bred to obey, began to falter. They saw what humans did on the battlefield. They saw men and women burned alive who still dragged themselves forward to take one more shot, to strike one more blow. They saw villages that should have surrendered, that instead chose to fight until the last child lay in the dust, teeth bared against armored giants. They saw survivors who clawed their way out of ruins with nothing left but rage. And the Dominion soldiers asked themselves, what enemy cannot be broken? The answer was humanity. Every Dominion victory tasted like ash. Every city they leveled, every fleet they burned, only created stories that spread faster than their terror. Because where the Dominion tried to erase us, we became legend, and legends are harder to kill than flesh. There was a story about the defense of Station Blackridge, a mining station turned fortress. Surrounded by 5 Dominion cruisers, its weapons stripped, its shields shattered, Blackridge should have fallen in hours. But the crew refused. They welded hull plates by hand. They turned mining drills into cannons. They used fuel cells as bombs. For 3 weeks they fought with nothing but improvisation and fury. When the Dominion finally withdrew, the station was nothing but a scorched husk, drifting in silence. And yet days later signals were picked up. Survivors had sealed themselves in the maintenance shafts and were still fighting. It was not victory. But it was something worse for the Dominion. It was defiance, and defiance, when it spreads, is more dangerous than any weapon. The galaxy watched closely now. Species that had once cowered before the Dominion began whispering of alliance. Some offered supplies, others intelligence. A few even dared to rise in rebellion, inspired by humanity's example. The Dominion had built its empire on fear, but now its subjects saw a new truth. Fear could be conquered. Fear could be turned against those who wielded it. What terrified the Dominion most was not our weapons. It was not our fleets. It was not even our ruthlessness. It was that we refused to accept death as the end. Where others saw finality, we saw only another obstacle. And that made us unpredictable, uncontrollable, and above all, unstoppable. The war entered a new phase. Humanity no longer fought to survive. We fought to win, and the monster we had embraced, the one that had clawed its way out of every grave, was now unleashed upon the stars. Our generals stopped thinking like soldiers. They began thinking like predators. We did not just strike supply chains. We poisoned them. We did not just disable fleets. We turned them into bait, luring reinforcements into ambushes that ended in carnage. We used fear itself as a weapon, broadcasting Dominion defeats across the stars, showing our enemies the faces of human survivors standing atop mountains of alien corpses. And it worked. Entire Dominion fleets surrendered without a fight, their captains unwilling to face us. Garrisons abandoned planets rather than endure another human siege. For the first time in their long history, Dominion worlds fell not to bombardment, but to whispers. Whispers of the human monsters who did not stop, who did not forgive, who did not forget. But there was a cost. Every monster has a price, and humanity was paying it in blood and soul. Our soldiers no longer slept without nightmares. Our leaders gave speeches not about honor, but about survival through brutality. Civilians were drafted, armed, and told that hesitation meant death. Mercy became a weakness. Compassion became rare. We were winning, yes, but with each victory, we lost something of ourselves. Some wondered aloud if we were still human at all, and yet, maybe that was the point. The Dominion had made us this way. They had forced us to stare into the abyss, and we had not blinked. Instead, we became the abyss, and now, that abyss was consuming them. The breaking point came at the Battle of Zorin's Gate, a strategic choke point that controlled access to half the galaxy's trade routes. The Dominion sent everything, dreadnoughts, carriers, entire legions. Humanity had only a fraction of their numbers, but numbers no longer mattered. The battle raged for weeks, the void itself filled with wreckage. Dominion commanders watched in disbelief as human ships, crippled and burning, rammed themselves into enemy cruisers, detonating reactors in suicidal fireballs. They saw human boarding parties fighting without air, claws and knives against armored giants, refusing to die even in vacuum. They saw human commanders ordering ships forward, even as their own vessels broke apart around them. When the smoke cleared, Zorin's Gate belonged to humanity. Not because we had more firepower, but because we had something the Dominion never understood. The will to gamble everything, to burn alive if necessary, to sacrifice without hesitation. From that day on, the Dominion's laughter was gone. They no longer mocked us as weak, no longer dismissed us as fragile. Instead, they whispered a new name for us across their channels, the monsters of Earth. And in their fear, we found power. For the first time, humanity had a chance not just to survive, but to reshape the galaxy itself. The question was no longer whether we would endure. The question was what kind of monsters we would become, and whether the galaxy could survive the answer. The Dominion had built its empire on certainty. They were certain their soldiers would always obey, certain their fleets would always dominate, certain their enemies would always kneel. Humanity shattered that certainty, piece by piece, battle by battle, until nothing was left but doubt. And doubt, once it takes root, spreads like wildfire. Dominion soldiers began to fear their own orders. Captains hesitated before advancing into human territory. Governors questioned whether reinforcements would arrive in time. What had once been an empire of unquestioned strength became an empire of second-guessing. And humanity, Sensing the weakness, pressed harder. But it was not victory that drove us. It was something darker. We had grown addicted to survival through ferocity. Every triumph, every battle won by sheer ruthlessness reinforced the lesson: mercy kills, brutality saves. The galaxy began to see us not only as warriors, but as something beyond warriors, something that had embraced survival so completely it no longer distinguished between victory and monstrosity. That transformation was clearest in the siege of Meraxis. The Dominion had fortified the world with orbital cannons, shield arrays, and enough troops to repel any assault. A human fleet of ragged ships arrived, barely enough to dent the defenses. Instead of retreating, they began a campaign that horrified even our allies. They cut off all supply lines. They poisoned the atmosphere with chemical clouds that corroded Dominion armor, but left humans, protected by makeshift filters, able to endure. They launched raids not to capture ground, but to spread terror, slaughtering outposts, leaving survivors deliberately to tell the tale. They even weaponized starvation, sending drones to drop rations marked with human insignias, each bite laced with slow-acting toxins. The siege lasted a year. By the end, Dominion soldiers mutinied, begging for surrender. When humanity finally stormed the capital, they found their enemy half dead from fear, disease, and hunger. The victory was total, but at a cost. Even our allies recoiled. They asked whether we had gone too far, whether we had crossed a line no species should ever cross. And humanity's answer was simple: there are no lines in survival. That answer echoed across the stars. Some species admired us, others feared us, but all recognized the truth. The age of humanity had begun. Yet within our own ranks, unease grew. Soldiers whispered of nightmares they could not escape. Civilians hardened into callousness, their eyes hollow from what they had endured. Leaders, once guided by hope, now spoke only of necessity. The monster we had embraced was no longer a mask we wore in war. It was becoming who we were, and maybe that was the only way forward. The Dominion, desperate and cornered, launched one last campaign. They called it Operation Purity. A fleet of titanic dreadnoughts, escorted by legions, meant to scour humanity from the stars once and for all. They threw everything they had left into this gamble. For them, it was extermination or survival. For us, it was just another challenge. When the Dominion Armada entered human space, they expected fear. They expected despair. Instead, they found worlds already evacuated, cities abandoned and rigged with explosives, colonies turned into death traps. Every inch of ground they gained bled them dry. Every victory turned into a funeral, and then humanity struck back. We did not face them in open battle. We became shadows. Fleets appeared, struck, and vanished. Outposts erupted into firestorms overnight. Their dreadnoughts, once symbols of invincibility, became floating coffins as human saboteurs tore through them from within. The Dominion fought an enemy they could not pin down, an enemy that refused to fight by their rules. And in the chaos, their unity shattered. Commanders accused each other of weakness. Fleets broke formation. The great empire, for the first time in history, began to collapse under the weight of its own fear. But even in collapse, they remained dangerous. Humanity's gamble was simple: push hard enough, fast enough, and the Dominion would implode before it could regroup. It was the greatest risk we had ever taken. If we failed, the galaxy would burn with us. We fought not as humans anymore, but as the monsters we had become. Entire colonies volunteered for suicide missions, knowing their deaths would weaken the Dominion. Soldiers carved tally marks into their armor, not for victories but for sacrifices made. Civilians armed themselves with knives, waiting for the day Dominion troops broke through their doors. The galaxy watched in horror as humanity bared its fangs completely. And then came the turning point, the Battle of Vorath's Maw. It was not meant to be a decisive battle. A single Dominion fleet pursued what they thought was a retreating human convoy. Instead, they walked into the jaws of a trap. Humanity had gathered every ship, every weapon, every ounce of fury into that system. The Dominion fleet outnumbered us 2-1, but we did not care. We rammed, we burned, we tore them apart piece by piece. The void was filled with fire and wreckage, a maelstrom of death. And when the last Dominion dreadnought fell silent, The galaxy understood. The monsters had won. Vorath's maw was not the end of the war, but it was the end of the Dominion's certainty. From that day on, they were in retreat. Humanity chased them across the stars, relentless, merciless, unyielding. The great empire that had once laughed at us now cowered in fear, its leaders fleeing from system to system, hunted like prey. But victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like hunger. Hunger for survival, hunger for dominance, hunger that could never be sated. And in that hunger, humanity realized the truth. We had survived because we became monsters, and monsters do not stop once they have tasted blood. The Dominion was dying. Its fleets lay scattered across the stars, its soldiers broken, its governors deserted by their own people. The empire that had once spanned half the galaxy now crumbled, devoured not only by human ferocity, but by the rebellion it had ignited. For the first time in living memory, the Dominion's banner was torn down, its arrogance shattered. And yet, victory did not taste the way we thought it would. Humanity stood among the ruins of a galactic empire, victorious but changed. We were no longer the same fragile species that had once gazed up at the stars with wonder. That innocence was gone. In its place stood something darker, something forged in fire and blood. Some called it evolution. Others called it damnation. In the aftermath, survivors across the galaxy whispered our name not with admiration, but with fear. The monsters of Earth, the beasts who endured everything, who embraced horror and used it as a weapon. We had not simply defeated the Dominion, we had become the thing they feared most. And now, the galaxy wondered, what would these monsters do next? There were debates among our own people. Leaders gathered, arguing whether humanity should pull back and heal, or press forward and seize the power vacuum left by the Dominion's fall. Some said we deserved rest, that our people had bled enough. Others said we could never go back to what we were, that the galaxy was ours to claim. But beneath all the words, all the speeches, one truth lingered: survival had changed us forever. On the colony world of Harrow's Reach, a child born during the war asked his mother why the Dominion had feared humans so much. She did not speak of fleets or weapons or strategy. She looked her child in the eyes and said, "Because we do not know when to stop." And that was the truth. The galaxy could not comprehend a species that refused extinction no matter the cost. Other civilizations bowed, compromised, sought safety in submission. Humanity did the opposite. We chose to burn alive rather than surrender. We chose to gamble everything, even our souls, for one more chance to live. That was why we survived, but it was also why we were feared. The ruins of Dominion worlds still burn as testimony. Entire cities reduced to ash, fleets left drifting as ghostly reminders of our wrath. Survivors speak of human soldiers who fought on with shattered limbs, of human fleets that rammed enemy ships even as they themselves crumbled apart. To some it is heroism, to others it is madness. To us it is simply survival. The question now is what comes after survival. The galaxy waits. Neutral civilizations eye us warily, unsure whether to welcome us as liberators or resist us as conquerors. Some whisper of alliances, others prepare their defenses. All of them know one thing: humanity cannot be ignored. Not anymore, because we have shown the truth. We are not fragile. We are not weak. We are not prey. We are monsters, and monsters survive. But survival is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. Humanity stands at the edge of a new era, faced with a choice that will define not only our destiny, but the fate of the galaxy. Do we sheath our claws and seek peace, or do we embrace the monster fully and take what fear has given us? History will remember the war with the Dominion, but history will also remember what came after, whether we became protectors or tyrants, whether we rebuilt or consumed, whether we proved that even monsters can find redemption, or whether we proved that once unleashed, monsters never rest. For now, one truth remains unshakable: the galaxy will never forget the species that endured fire, plague, starvation, and slaughter. The species that looked extinction in the eye and laughed. The species that became a nightmare to fight, a legend to whisper, and a force that no empire could ever cage: humanity, the monsters of Earth. And as long as monsters walk among the stars, we will never die, because that is why we survive.